The morning sun cast long shadows across Ahmad Malik's front yard as he stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the construction crew pour concrete into what his neighbors insisted was just a driveway. His fingers tightened around the ceramic mug, knuckles whitening. Ahmad knew better. What his neighbors saw as a simple home improvement project, he recognized as the first step in a calculated encroachment that would eventually threaten the entire neighborhood. It had started 3 months ago when the Richardsons moved into the colonial-style house at the end of Maple Street in suburban Lahore. The property had stood vacant for nearly 2 years, its garden overgrown and windows clouded with dust. The neighborhood had celebrated when the sold sign appeared, relieved that property values might finally stabilize. Ahmad, too, had been pleased until the surveyors arrived. They were mapping property boundaries. Mrs. Khawaja, his elderly neighbor of 15 years, had explained when Ahmad inquired about the men with tripods and measuring equipment. Apparently, there's some confusion about where the Richardsons' property ends and the community land begins. The community land was a modest green space that separated the houses on Maple Street from the small stream that ran behind them. For decades, neighborhood children had played there. Families had picnicked there, and Ahmad's own daughter, Amina, had learned to ride her bicycle there. It wasn't officially a park, just an undefined strip that had become the heart of their community through years of shared use and care. Ahmad set down his coffee and grabbed his jacket. The October air carried a bite that hinted at the approaching winter, but he barely noticed as he strode across his lawn toward the construction site. Mr. Richardson, a tall man with prematurely silver hair and expensive loafers that seemed perpetually free of dirt, was examining blueprints with the foreman. "Good morning," Ahmad called, forcing a neighborly smile. "Making progress, I see." Richardson looked up, his return smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Ahmad, right? Yes, finally getting this driveway sorted. Previous owners had no concept of proper access." Ahmad nodded, studying the layout of the freshly poured concrete. "It seems to extend quite far into the green space. My property line extends exactly 3.2 meters beyond what the previous owners utilized," Richardson replied, tapping the blueprint. "I've merely reclaimed what was always mine. But that area has been used by trespassers, technically speaking." Richardson's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "I have the survey documents and the deed. It's all perfectly legal." Ahmed felt heat rising in his chest, but kept his voice level. "The community has maintained that space for generations. And I appreciate the free landscaping service," Richardson chuckled, "but I have plans for my property that don't include public access." As Ahmad walked back to his house, he noticed other neighbors watching from windows and porches. He recognized the worry in their eyes, the same concern he felt gnawing his stomach. This wasn't about a driveway. The concrete pouring today was merely the opening move in what promised to be a larger battle. Inside, his wife Fatima was preparing breakfast for their daughter. "Well?" she asked, reading his expression. "He has the paperwork," Ahmad said, sinking into a kitchen chair. "But there's something not right. That land has never been claimed by any homeowner in the 30 years this neighborhood has existed." "So what do we do?" Fatima asked, placing a plate of eggs before him. Ahmad watched through the window as the construction crew smoothed the wet concrete, extending what was ostensibly a driveway into what had always been community space. The Richardsons' plans would cut off access to the stream, divide the green space, and fundamentally alter the character of the neighborhood they all loved. "First," Ahmad said, pulling his laptop toward him, "we research. Then we organize. This isn't just about our property values or even convenience. It's about protecting something that belongs to all of us." Amina looked up from her breakfast. "Is something wrong with our house, Baba?" Ahmad smiled at his daughter, remembering how she had learned to ride her bike on the very land now being paved over. "No, sweetheart. But sometimes, when something is wrong, you have to be the one to make it right." And in that moment, as the concrete dried outside, hardening into what everyone else saw as just a driveway, Ahmad made a decision that would change everything. Ahmad spent the next 3 days buried in dusty records at the Lahore Land Registry office. The clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself as Tariq, had initially seemed annoyed by Ahmad's persistence, but gradually warmed to his cause. "Property disputes are always messy," Tariq said, sliding another folder across the desk, "especially when they involve land that's been informally used for generations." Ahmed flipped through yellowed pages of the original neighborhood development plans from 1985. His eyes widened as he found what he was looking for. "This can't be right," he muttered, comparing the original plans to the copy of Richardson's deed he had obtained through a formal request. "The boundaries don't match." Tariq leaned over, squinting at the documents. "That's interesting. The original development plan clearly shows that green strip as designated community land, not part of any private property." Ahmed felt a surge of hope. "But Richardson's deed includes it. How is that possible?" Clerical error, perhaps. Or Tariq hesitated, lowering his voice. Sometimes wealthy buyers find ways to adjust boundaries in their favor before purchase. It's not common, but it happens. Armed with photocopies of the original plans, Ahmad returned home to find a neighborhood in transformation. The Richardsons' driveway had been completed, cutting a wide, curved path through what had once been grass. Construction had begun on what appeared to be a tall privacy fence that would effectively seal off access to the stream. Ahmad's phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Khawaja. Richardson just had Amir's children removed from the green space. Called them trespassers to their faces. The poor dears were in tears. Amir Khan lived 3 houses down and had twin boys who spent most afternoons playing near the stream. Ahmed felt his resolve harden. That evening, he invited several neighbors to his home, spreading the documents across his dining table. The original plans are clear, he explained to the gathered faces. That land was never meant to be private property. But what can we do? Asked Amir, his expression tight with anger. Richardson has expensive lawyers. We're just middle-class families. We have something more valuable than money, Ahmad replied. We have community. Over cups of chai, they formed the Maple Street Preservation Committee. Each neighbor took responsibility for specific tasks. Amir would organize a petition. Mrs. Khawaja, who had lived in the neighborhood longest, would document the history of community use. Fatima, with her background in environmental science, would assess the ecological impact of the construction. And Ahmad would approach the local council with their findings. What they didn't anticipate was the speed of Richardson's progress. Within a week, construction crews had begun clearing trees near the stream, trees that had stood for decades, providing shade for picnickers and habitat for birds. He's moving fast because he knows we're organizing, Fatima observed as they watched a large oak come down. Richardson's actions galvanized the neighborhood. Even families who had initially stayed neutral began attending the committee meetings held in Ahmed's living room. When Ahmed arrived at the local council office the following Monday, 15 neighbors accompanied him. The council clerk seemed overwhelmed by their presence. Mr. Malik, we typically handle these matters through formal channels, not through. He gestured at the group, impromptu delegations. This is a community matter that requires immediate attention, Ahmad replied, placing the original plans and Richardson's deeds side by side on the counter. There's been an error in the property records and it's being exploited to destroy community land and access to natural resources. The clerk examined the documents, his brow furrowing. This does appear to be a discrepancy, but addressing it will require a formal hearing. Mr. Richardson has already obtained construction permits based on his deed. How long until a hearing can be scheduled? Ahmad asked. 6 to 8 weeks, typically. A collective groan rose from the group. In 6 weeks, Richardson would have completely transformed the space. As they left the council office, Ahmad noticed a woman taking photos of the construction site from across the street. She had a press badge hanging around her neck. Excuse me, Ahmad approached her. Are you covering the Richardson construction? The woman looked up from her camera. But Lahore Daily News. And not exactly. I'm working on a larger story about private development encroaching on community spaces across the city. This is happening in several neighborhoods. Ahmad felt a chill. You mean this isn't an isolated incident? Samia showed him photos on her camera, similar scenes playing out in different parts of Lahore. There seems to be a pattern. Wealthy buyers purchase properties adjacent to community land and mysteriously end up with deeds that include portions of that land. Ahmad introduced Samia to the committee members present. We need to make this public, he said. Would you be interested in hearing what we've discovered? Samia's eyes lit up. Absolutely. This could be bigger than I thought. As they walked back to Maple Street together, Ahmad noticed Richardson watching from his property, phone pressed to his ear, his expression darkening at the sight of the group with the journalist. He's not going to make this easy, Fatima whispered. Ahmad nodded, watching as another tree came down, its branches crashing onto land that had belonged to everyone and no one for as long as anyone could remember. Neither will we, he replied. Samia's article, titled The Quiet Land Grab, How Lahore's Community Spaces Are Disappearing, appeared on the front page of the Lahore Daily News 3 days later. It featured the Maple Street controversy prominently, with photos of children playing in the green space juxtaposed against images of Richardson's expanding construction. Ahmed's dining room table, covered with documents and surrounded by determined neighbors, became the article's central image, a symbol of grassroots resistance. The phone calls began almost immediately. Mr. Malik, this is Fareed Chaudhry from Canal View. We're experiencing the same issue here. A new owner suddenly claiming community land with suspicious documentation. Ahmad, it's happening in Johar Town too. Can we join forces? By evening, Ahmad had spoken with representatives from 4 other neighborhoods facing similar encroachments. What had started as one man's concern about a driveway was evolving into a citywide movement. Meanwhile, the Richardson construction continued unabated. The fence now stood nearly complete, an imposing barrier of dark wooden panels that blocked both access and views to the stream. Signs reading private property. Trespassers will be Primrose ECUTED had been posted every few meters along its perimeter. Ahmad was returning from a meeting with the newly formed Coalition for Community Spaces when he found an official-looking envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Richardson's lawyers, threatening legal action for defamatory statements and interference with lawful property improvements. "They're trying to intimidate you," said Fatima that evening, reading the letter with a frown. "This is what happens when people with money feel threatened." Ahmad set the letter aside. "It won't work. We have facts on our side." The next day it brought unexpected support. A local environmental group contacted Ahmad after reading Samia's article. The stream behind their homes, they explained, was part of a critical watershed. Richardson's construction, particularly his plans to build a boathouse directly on the water, potentially violated environmental protection statutes. "We can file for an emergency injunction on environmental grounds," explained Zara Hashmi, the group's legal advisor. "It won't solve the boundary dispute, but it could halt construction while that issue is being resolved." With Zara's help, they filed the necessary paperwork. 3 days later, a court official arrived at Richardson's property with a temporary stop work order. From his kitchen window, Ahmad watched Richardson's animated argument with the official, satisfaction warming his chest as the construction crew began packing up their equipment. That evening, the doorbell rang. Ahmad opened it to find Richardson standing on his doorstep, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. "May I come in?" Richardson asked, his tone carefully controlled. Ahmad hesitated, then stepped aside. Richardson entered, declining the offered seat. "I understand you're behind this injunction," Richardson said without preamble. "The environmental group filed it," Ahmad replied. "But yes, I connected them with our situation." Richardson paced the small living room. "Do you have any idea what these delays are costing me? Do you have any idea what your improvements are costing our community?" Ahmad countered. Richardson stopped, studying Ahmad with new interest. "You know, when I first moved here, I was told this was a quiet neighborhood where people minded their own business." "You were misinformed," Ahmad said simply. "This is a neighborhood where people look out for each other and for shared spaces that belong to all of us." Richardson's expression hardened. "I've dealt with community activists before, Mr. Malik. They make noise, get some press, feel self-important for a while. But eventually, they lose interest or run out of resources. Money and influence win in the end." "Perhaps that's been your experience," Ahmad acknowledged. "But this isn't just about a driveway anymore. You've united people across the city who were facing similar situations alone. We become something larger." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Richardson's face. Then his phone buzzed. He checked it and smiled. "Interesting timing," he said. "That was my lawyer. Your environmental injunction has been overturned. My permits were all in order. Construction resumes tomorrow." After Richardson left, Ahmad sat heavily on the sofa. The temporary victory had been just that, temporary. Richardson had connections they couldn't match and resources they couldn't compete with. Or could they? Ahmad's phone rang. It was Samia. "I've been digging deeper," she said without preamble. "And I found something interesting about Richardson and several other developers who've been acquiring these properties. They're all connected to the same investment group, Urban Renewal Partners. And guess who sits on the zoning board that approves their permits?" Ahmad felt a surge of hope. "Who?" "The brother-in-law of Urban Renewal's CEO. There's a clear conflict of interest here, and potentially something more serious." "You think there's corruption involved?" Ahmad asked. "I think," Samia said carefully, "that we need to look at the bigger picture. This isn't about individual property owners making improvements. This appears to be a coordinated effort to privatize public and community spaces across Lahore." The next morning, construction equipment returned to Richardson's property. Ahmad watched from his window as workers resumed building the boathouse foundation at the stream's edge. But instead of despair, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He opened his laptop and began composing an email to the growing coalition of neighborhood representatives. The subject line read, "Next steps, following the money." What had started with one man noticing a suspicious driveway had uncovered something much larger. And Ahmad Malik was just getting started. Urban Renewal Partners has acquired 17 properties in Lahore over the past 18 months, Samia explained, spreading documents across Ahmad's dining room table. Each one borders community land or public space that somehow ended up included in their property deeds. The dining room had become the unofficial headquarters of what local media now called the Community Spaces Movement, Representatives from 6 neighborhoods sat shoulder to shoulder around the table that November evening, their breath visible in the unheated room. Amma had turned down the heat to save money. The legal costs were mounting. "Look at the pattern," Samia continued, placing a map on the table with red pins marking the properties. "These aren't random acquisitions. They create a connected network of private land that effectively controls access to the canal system and several public parks." Ahmad studied the map. "They're creating private corridors through public space." "But why?" asked Fareed from Canal View. "What's the endgame?" Zara, the environmental lawyer who had filed their injunction, pulled out her laptop. "I think I found the answer. Urban Renewal just submitted this proposal to the City Planning Commission." She turned her screen to show a glossy presentation titled Lahore Riverwalk, Exclusive Waterfront Living and Commercial Development. The plan showed luxury apartments, high-end shopping centers, and private recreational facilities built along the city's waterways, many in locations currently occupied by community green spaces. "They're not just taking our community areas," Ahmad realized. "They're assembling land for a massive development project. And they need control of the waterfront properties to make it work," Zara added, "including the stream behind your homes." A heavy silence fell over the room. The scale of what they were fighting suddenly became clear. Not one ambitious homeowner, but a coordinated corporate strategy worth billions. Ahmed's phone buzzed with a text from Fatima. "Richardson meeting with city officials at cafe near your office. Wearing suits, looking celebratory." Ahmad showed the group. "They're moving forward. We need to act quickly." Over cups of tea that grew cold as they worked, the group formulated a 3-pronged strategy. Samia would publish a follow-up expose revealing the connection between urban renewal and the zoning board. Zara would file formal complaints alleging conflicts of interest in the permit approval process, and Ahmad would organize a public demonstration to bring community attention to the issue. As the meeting concluded, Mrs. Khawaja, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "My husband worked for the city planning office for 40 years before he passed. He always said that in cases like this, you need to look at the water rights." "Water rights?" Ahmad asked. "Yes. Who controls access to the waterways controls development in those areas. There are old laws about public access that can't be overridden even by private ownership." This insight led to a late-night research session in the city archives, where Ahmad and Zara discovered that a colonial-era law still on the books guaranteed public access to all of Lahore's waterways, including a mandated green buffer zone extending 15 meters from every bank. "This could be our silver bullet," Zara said excitedly. "If this law is still valid, Richardson's fence and urban renewal's entire development plan violates it." The next morning, Ahmad was preparing for a meeting with the legal team when his daughter Amina rushed in from school. "Baba, they're cutting down the big tree by the stream." Ahmed hurried outside to find a crew of chainsaws taking down the massive banyan tree that had stood at the bend in the stream for as long as anyone could remember. Children had played in its shade for generations. Ahmad had proposed to Fatima beneath its branches. "Stop," he shouted, running toward the property line. "You can't cut that tree." A security guard blocked his path. "This is private property, sir. Please step back." Behind the guard, Ahmad could see Richardson watching from his deck, a satisfied smile on his face. More neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the sound of chainsaws. As they gathered at the fence line, the historic tree, which had survived decades of monsoons and droughts, began to creak. With a tremendous crash that seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood, it fell. Something broke in Ahmad at that moment, not his resolve, but his patience. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. It was about the soul of their community and the future of their city. That evening, nearly 200 people gathered in the community center near Maple Street. Ahmad had expected perhaps 50, but word had spread through social media and neighborhood networks. The room hummed with energy as people shared similar stories of encroachment and lost community spaces. Ahmad took the microphone, his voice steady despite his nerves. "What began with one driveway has revealed a systematic attempt to privatize our community spaces and waterways. Today, we lost a tree that meant something to all of us. But we gained something too, a movement, a voice." He outlined what they had discovered about urban renewal partners, the conflicts of interest, and most importantly, the colonial-era water access law that could be their strongest legal defense. "Tomorrow," Ahmad announced, "we file a comprehensive legal challenge based on these water rights. But legal fights take time. So we're also organizing a citywide demonstration this weekend at all 17 urban renewal sites simultaneously. We need to show them and our city officials that we're watching, we're organized, and we won't be silenced." The crowd erupted in applause. As Ahmad stepped away from the microphone, he noticed a familiar figure slipping out the back door, Richardson. Their eyes met briefly, and Ahmad saw something he hadn't expected: uncertainty. Later that night, as Ahmad was going through legal documents in preparation for the next day's filing, his doorbell rang. It was nearly midnight. He opened the door cautiously to find a young woman he didn't recognize standing on his doorstep. "Mr. Malik, my name is Sophia Khan. I worked for Urban Renewal Partners until this afternoon." She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I have documents you need to see. Evidence of bribes, falsified deeds, and plans for developments that haven't been made public." Ahmad invited her in, heart racing. "Why are you bringing this to me?" Sophia set a thumb drive on the table. "Because I grew up in a neighborhood like this. Because my grandparents lost their home to a similar development when I was a child. And because what they're planning goes far beyond what anyone realizes." She pulled out her phone and showed Ahmad a rendering labeled Phase 2. "They're not just taking the streams and green spaces," she said quietly. "Once they establish precedent with those acquisitions, they're coming for the entire neighborhood."